I'm Elaine Williams, 27 years old. I never imagined the day I became a millionaire would begin with the tragedy of losing my grandparents in a horrific car accident. They were the ones who raised me and loved me when my parents only chased money and status. But before I could even process my grief, my grandparents' lawyer called me and revealed a shocking truth. I was the sole heir to their entire $12 million estate. What should have been the last gift of love from them quickly turned my family into something unrecognizable. Greedy, ruthless strangers. The hugs and condolences from yesterday turned into accusations, threats, and eventually an order for me to leave my grandparents' own home. In just one night, blood ties turned into bitter hatred over money. And it didn't stop there. The very next day, my family put together an actual asset division plan with PowerPoint slides, demanding that I sign over most of the inheritance. I was stunned to realize that the people I once called my parents, my brother and my sister, now saw me as nothing but their enemy. So what happened when I chose to stand up against my entire family to protect my grandparents' last wishes? You won't believe the cruelty they unleashed to try and destroy me. And in the reading of the will, the truth that exploded in that room shocked everyone. If this story leaves you angry and desperate to know what happened next, make sure to hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so you won't miss the shocking twists to come. A childhood in the shadow of neglect and the love that remained. My name is Elaine Williams. From the time I was little, I knew I wasn't like the rest of my family. My parents, Thomas and Diane, lived only for money and their careers. Their lives were packed with business trips, meetings, and ambitious projects. In their eyes, love was never as important as achievements. My brother, Brian, was always celebrated as the golden boy. Smart, business savvy, and effortlessly charming. My sister, Stephanie, became a respected lawyer, and every word out of her mouth earned admiration. And then there was me, the youngest daughter, who would spend hours sketching in her notebook, lost in the world of art instead of chasing grades or status. To my parents, I was useless, a waste of time. I still remember one family dinner when I was 13. I timidly told my father, "Dad, I just won first place in the school-wide art contest." He set down his wine glass, smirked, and said, "Uh-huh. But remember, Elaine, painting won't ever put food on the table. Stop dreaming." That sentence cut through my little spark of joy like a cold knife. In a household filled with pressure and constant comparison, my only refuge was my grandparents, Harold and Martha. They lived in an old, charming house not far away, and to me, that short walk from my parents' house to theirs felt like stepping out of hell and into heaven. My grandfather, Harold, always listened patiently, teaching me that true strength came from kindness. He would place his warm hand on my shoulder and tell me, "Ela, your worth isn't measured by money. It's measured by the good you bring into this world." My grandmother, Martha, had once been a gifted painter, but she gave up her career to raise my father. She was the one who saw the fire of art inside me and encouraged me to nurture it. On rainy afternoons, we'd sit together in her glass sunroom, surrounded by light, painting, and talking. I often asked her, "Grandma, do you think I can live my whole life just painting?" She'd smile, her eyes shining. "Why not? You have the right to live your own life, Elaine." When my parents left for 6 months on a business expansion overseas, they planned to hire a nanny for me. To them, outsourcing their youngest daughter was just another line item in their busy schedule. But my grandparents refused. They looked at me with unwavering determination and said, "Ayla, you'll stay with us. No one can replace family." So I moved into their old house, and those 6 months became the most defining time of my childhood and my life. Every morning, Grandpa would take me to the lake shore where he had once proposed to Grandma. He'd sit with his fishing rod while I sketched the world around me. He told me stories about hardships and failures and the lessons that shaped him into a strong and decent man. His deep, steady voice etched a belief into my heart. "Ela, your value isn't in wealth. It's in the goodness you give back to life." On rainy afternoons, Grandma led me into her beloved glass sunroom. She would lay out her carefully kept watercolor sets and with her gentle hands guide mine, showing me each brush stroke, each shade of color. She never pushed me to paint perfectly. She only whispered, "Paint what your heart sees." She was the first person who made me feel truly understood and seen. At night, the three of us would gather around the dinner table. There were no talks about stocks or contracts, just laughter, the clinking of spoons against plates, and simple stories. What I remember most was the way my grandparents looked me straight in the eyes when I spoke, never interrupting, never dismissing me. Those were the rare moments in my childhood when I truly felt seen. When the 6 months ended, my parents returned and wanted to take me back to the old house. I cried for days, clinging to my grandmother's hand, begging, "I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you." But of course, in my family, a child's voice never carried any weight. From then on, a bitter truth carved itself into my heart. My parents gave me life, but it was my grandparents who truly raised my soul. Their unconditional love was the only flame that kept me from going dark in a house where I was constantly belittled. But that was also when the cracks in our family began to grow deeper. My father often snapped at my grandfather, "You're ruining her. The world out there is cruel, and you're teaching her to dream. She'll only end up failing." Grandpa would answer calmly, his voice low yet steady. "If the world isn't kind enough, then she'll be the one to make it better." His words made my father's face flush with rage, while I broke down in tears, not only because I was scared of the shouting, but because deep down, I knew my grandparents were the only anchor keeping me steady in a home where I was nothing but invisible. Family dinners were the clearest proof of that divide. My brother Brian would excitedly brag about his $1 million investments and luxury business trips. Each time my parents' eyes lit up, pride written all over their faces. My sister Stephanie would share stories about her high-profile cases, the courtroom victories that made her entire law firm praise her. My mother would smile with satisfaction, my father nodding as though he could see the golden future of the family line. And me, I would timidly share about a small prize from a school art contest or a sketch of mine displayed at a local exhibit. The response I got was nothing more than a half-hearted nod, a polite smile, before the conversation quickly shifted to more important things. No matter how hard I tried, I was just a shadow, faint and forgettable, in that house. I'll never forget one day when I snuck past the hallway and overheard my mother arguing with my grandmother. My grandmother's voice was sharp, every word slicing through the air. You're blinded by achievements and you're neglecting this child. Elaine isn't weak. She's just different from you. My mother's voice came right after, harsh and venomous. You're the one dividing her from this family. Don't forget, she's my daughter, not yours. I froze where I stood, my chest tightening as though someone had gripped my heart. Those words seared themselves into my young mind. I wasn't truly loved. I was nothing but a burden, a thorn in my parents' eyes. From that day on, I grew up in a constant split. On one side, the contempt and rejection of my parents and siblings, people who only valued status and money. On the other, the open arms of my grandparents, where I was sheltered, cherished, and taught that true worth was never measured by a diploma or a paycheck, but by how kindly a person chose to live in this world. The cruel words of my mother, the times I was left to drown in silence, carved scars across my childhood and even into my adult years. If not for my grandparents, I would have broken long ago. They didn't just give me a home. They gave me the belief that I was worthy of living true to myself, that love became the only flame that kept me alive. But I never imagined that very flame of love would one day expose my family's true face when the will was read. That fateful day began with a short phone call from my father. His voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him, no longer cold or sharp, but trembling, rushed. Elaine, there's been an accident. A truck lost control. Your grandparents, they didn't make it. I froze beside my drawing table, my hand suddenly limp. The pencil slipped through my fingers and rolled across the wooden floor with a hollow clack that echoed through the silent room. That small sound felt like a blade slicing through the fragile piece I had left. My ears buzzed. I couldn't hear anything else my father said. Only one thought screamed in my mind. They're gone, and they're never coming back. The world blurred. The colors I once loved bled into a dull, endless gray. The only two people who had ever truly seen me, listened to me, loved me without condition, were gone forever. I felt hollow, like my soul had been ripped out. The days that followed were like a fever dream. I moved through them like a machine, answering calls, signing funeral papers, responding to questions. Inside, I was nothing but a wandering ghost. At night, I would wake with a start, thinking I heard my grandfather calling, Ella, from downstairs, or that I'd find my grandmother waiting in the glass room with her paintbrushes. But they were only illusions. The funeral was held in the church they had loved all their lives. Candlelight flickered. Prayers hummed low. White flowers lined the aisles. But I couldn't focus on the prayers. My eyes darted from face to face, catching the stares, the whispers. No one spoke about the love or kindness my grandparents had left behind. Instead, the air buzzed with hushed conversations about assets and inheritance. When I turned, I caught my brother Brian tucked into a corner of the hall. He leaned in close to my sister, Stephanie, and whispered. I only caught fragments, but they cut straight into me. That house, it's worth at least $3 million. Do you think they updated the will? My chest clenched. This should have been a moment for family to remember the lives of my grandparents together, but to them, everything had already been reduced to numbers. I bit my lip until it bled, turning away to hide the tears burning in my eyes. And in that moment, I realized, before I even had time to grieve, I was already facing a brutal truth. To my family, what mattered wasn't the love or the memories. It was the inheritance. I became the sole heir. 3 days later, the entire family gathered at the office of George Bennett, the longtime friend of my grandparents. I sat at the end of the polished mahogany table, my heart pounding wildly. My father sat across from me, his face full of confidence, as if victory was already his. My mother, disturbingly calm, leaned toward my aunt and whispered, "The kitchen is so outdated. I'll have it completely renovated." George looked at me with sympathetic eyes, then began to read the will. Each word rang through the silent room like a tolling bell. And then he spoke the words that shattered everything. Harold and Martha Williams have decided to leave their entire estate, including the house, cash, investment portfolio, and art collection, to their granddaughter, Elaine Williams. Elaine is the sole heir. For a moment, the room fell into a deathly silence. I could hear my own breath quickening. Then came the screech of chairs, the pounding of a fist on the table. My father roared, "Impossible! This is a mistake! They would never cut out their own son like this." Stephanie shot up, her eyes blazing, her voice sharp with threat. "Elaine, don't think you can keep it all. You know nothing about finance or law. You'll lose it soon enough, and we won't let it slide." Brian sneered, his laughter cold and bitter. "You're nothing but a dreamer, sketching a few silly drawings and earning their pity. Don't fool yourself into thinking you deserve this inheritance." I sat frozen, my trembling hands clasped tightly beneath the table. I never imagined blood ties could twist so quickly, from comforting me after my grandparents' death to now turning into knives aimed straight at me. George remained calm, presenting the original will and medical records, proving my grandparents had been fully lucid when they signed it. Then he handed me a sealed letter. My hands shook as I opened it, instantly recognizing my grandmother's delicate handwriting. "Dearest Elaine, if you are reading this, it means we are gone. Please don't grieve too long. We chose to leave everything to you, not to divide the family, but because we trust you to live true to yourself and continue to spread kindness. Your father and siblings already have their own paths. You are different. You see beauty where others see only profit. Believe in your own way. We are proud of you, not for what you achieve, but because you are you. With all our love, Grandma and Grandpa." Tears blurred the ink on the page, but before I could absorb her words, my mother's voice sliced through the air. "Absurd. Clearly they were manipulated. George, you should have advised them differently. You know this will destroy our family." George sighed. Martha and Harold were perfectly sound of mind. This was their carefully considered decision. My father's voice hardened as he turned to me. "Elaine, you'll sign it over, won't you? You're not going to cling to everything and abandon your family?" I raised my tear-filled eyes, my voice shaking but firm. "I will honor my grandparents' wishes." The room exploded. Stephanie slammed her hand on the table. Brian jabbed a finger in my face, while my mother burst into fake sobs. "Ungrateful child! After all the years we raised you, now you betray your own family?" I wanted to scream that it was my grandparents who had paid for my schooling, that my parents had never once supported my dreams, that I had grown up under their neglect and scorn. But I swallowed it down, letting the tears fall silently. When the meeting collapsed, everyone stormed out hurling curses. In the parking lot, my father gripped my arm, pulled me close, and hissed coldly, "You'll hand over at least half. If not, Don't ever call me father again. I yanked my hand back, choking out. Maybe you never truly saw me as your daughter. His jaw clenched tight, and he walked away without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. The grief of losing my grandparents had barely sunk in before another storm of betrayal hit me. I had hoped for comfort, but instead I was treated as an enemy. What should have been a symbol of love had now become the spark that burned everything down. The following days were a nightmare. My phone rang nonstop. My mother wept and scolded. Elaine, you must reconsider. Your father is their own flesh and blood. They would never really cut him out. My father sent me endless emails, laying out how the assets should be divided, as if it were already decided. Brian called, his voice dripping with fake sweetness. You have no experience, sis. Sign it over to me. I'll manage it and make sure you get a share. You won't have to worry about a thing. I hung up, bitterness rising in my throat. It was clear now they didn't care how much I hurt losing my grandparents. All they wanted was the money. I went to my grandparents' old house, the place overflowing with memories. Standing at the porch, I half expected them to open the door and greet me with a smile, but instead there was only silence. I clutched the keys George had given me, my heart heavy. Inside, everything was still the same. The smell of old wood, my grandmother's paintings on the wall, my grandfather's rocking chair. I felt small and lost in the familiar space that now seemed unbearably empty. I knew this was only the beginning. My family would not stop. And I was about to walk into a battle I had never imagined. But I never expected that just days later, they would turn a family dinner into a horrifying trap to force me to give it all up. The family's betrayal. 3 days after the will was read, I received a phone call from my mother. Her voice was unusually soft. Elaine, the family just wants to talk. Come over for dinner. We'll find a fair and reasonable solution together. I hesitated. Ever since the meeting at the lawyer's office, my phone had been flooded with accusatory messages, some dripping with tearful guilt, others cold and threatening. And yet, deep inside me flickered a fragile spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they would finally listen. I agreed, not realizing I was walking straight into a trap. That evening, I arrived at my parents' house. The place was brightly lit, the dining table laid out as if for a grand celebration. But when I walked in, it wasn't just my parents and siblings. The entire paternal side of the family filled the room. Uncles, aunts, even cousins I hadn't seen in years. They all turned to look at me, their eyes stripped of warmth, heavy with judgment. My father rose from his seat, a large television screen glowing behind him. He pressed a button and a slide appeared with the title, Family Estate Distribution Plan. My stomach dropped. Even in this moment, they had turned it into a business meeting. My father spoke, his voice sharp, cloaked in the guise of reason. Elaine, you're young and inexperienced. Holding the entire estate will only be a burden. This is a fair plan. 60% goes to me, their son. 20% to Brian and Stephanie, who know how to manage. You'll keep the remaining 20%, which is more than enough for a girl who just paints. That's reasonable. I was speechless. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. Aunt Patricia even chimed in. Elaine, you must think of the family. Surely your grandparents never wanted the inheritance to divide us. I drew a deep breath, fighting back tears. No, My grandparents left a clear will. That was their decision, and I will respect it. I will not sign anything. The atmosphere exploded. Brian slammed his palm against the table, leaning toward me, his eyes sharp as blades. Who do you think you are? You have no idea how to manage wealth. You'll lose it all within 5 years. Don't make yourself a laughing stock. Stephanie cut in, her voice icy, each word like a nail driven into wood. Elaine, you're destroying yourself. You think the law will protect you? There are countless ways we can overturn this will. If you're smart, you'll compromise now. My mother burst into sobs, her shoulders shaking as she choked out, "My daughter, how can you treat us this way? After all the sacrifices your father and I made raising you, you're keeping everything for yourself? Aren't you ashamed?" I stared at her, my throat tightening. I wanted to scream that it was my grandparents who had paid my tuition, who had bought me every box of paints, every sheet of paper. But I stayed silent, my nails digging into my palms until they broke skin. My father suddenly stood, pointing directly at me. "You're selfish. You only think of yourself. You're tearing this family apart." I looked him in the eye, this time without bowing my head. My voice trembled, but it was clear. "It's not me destroying this family. It's your greed that is ripping us apart." The air grew suffocating. One by one, relatives piled on, each adding another reproach, another invisible knife. They called me ungrateful, a traitor, some even spat venom. This girl must have manipulated her grandparents, confused them into writing such a will. My whole body shook. Every word felt like a slap, pushing me further away from the people who were supposed to be family. I searched the room desperately for a trace of compassion, but every gaze was cold, every gaze except Sarah's. My quiet cousin, rarely seen at gatherings, met my eyes with a silent look, a faint glimmer of empathy in the darkness. At last I stood, my chair clattering back. I faced my parents, my voice breaking yet resolute. "My grandparents trusted me. I will not betray them. If that means losing this family, then so be it." The room erupted in noise, shouts, sobs, accusations, but I heard only my father's final words, slicing through the chaos. "If you walk out of this house without signing, don't ever come back. From this moment on, I have no daughter named Elaine." The air cracked with false tears and poisonous whispers. I turned and walked away, my vision blurred with tears. As I passed Sarah, she slipped a folded note into my hand, whispering, "Call me if you need help." I didn't dare look back. I only gripped the paper tightly, clinging to it like the last fragile thread of light in a room drowning in darkness. A new beginning at my grandparents' house. That night, I drove back to my grandparents' old house. The yellow street lights stretched along the empty road. I sat in the car, staring at the familiar home, yet feeling like an outcast, someone abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect me. My family, the ones who should have stood by me, had turned their backs, tearing apart all bonds for the sake of money. I parked beneath the maple tree by the porch. The house stood there like a quiet elder, unchanged, the gray roof tiles, the wooden porch, the old swing creaking softly in the wind. Sliding the key into the lock, I heard the gentle click of metal, and the door swung open. A rush of scents met me, aged wood, lemon soap, and the faint trace of my grandmother's rose perfume. A wave of memory swept over me. I paused at the doorway, my hand resting on the frame, steadying my breath. From now on, this was my home, yet it was also the place where everything began to unravel. The living room was exactly as I remembered it, lace doilies on the armchairs, the black and white wedding photo of my grandparents, the grandfather clock ticking slowly. I set down my suitcase and walked the long hallway to my grandfather's study. The late afternoon sun poured through the window, streaking across the polished oak desk. On top, just as Lawyer George had promised, were boxes neatly tied and labeled in my grandmother's delicate handwriting: finances, letters, personal journals, art records. I reached for the box marked letters. Inside were yellowed envelopes bound with a blue ribbon. The first one I opened was in her handwriting, dated 1999. Harold, I worry about Thomas. He sees profit in everything, even in the eyes of his own daughter. I fear we're losing something more important than money. My throat tightened. I set it aside and opened the next. Some were bank receipts. One was my grandfather's meticulous note. Loan to Thomas, round one, 400,000, round two, $600,000, repayment term 5 years. No interest, provided he keeps ethical practices. In the margin, my grandmother had scribbled, "If he forgets, remind him. If he pretends to forget, stop." I moved on to the finances box. Thick binders, orderly as always. Each file told a story: notarized contracts, bank statements, investment logs. In a slim folder, I found a memo tucked between papers. Unauthorized access attempt, require bank change and multi-layer security. Beneath it was his handwritten note. Thomas requested account access twice without approval. Denied. My palms grew damp. All those years ago, he had already begun defending himself. Alone. On the bookshelf, one drawer sat slightly lower than the rest. When I tugged, it stuck halfway. Running my hand along the bottom, I felt a hidden latch. Click. The drawer slid open, revealing a brown envelope marked, "For Elaine, when you are ready." Inside was a small black USB and a few printed spreadsheets. A quick index read: family loans, details, internal correspondence, Thomas's company, interim audit, irregularities, Brian's accounts, computer access, browsing history, Stephanie. My chest tightened. They hadn't been blind. They had seen everything, and they had quietly gathered proof, not only to protect me, but to protect the legacy they built. I plugged the USB into my laptop. Folders appeared, neat as a miniature archive. Opening family loans, I saw scanned contracts, signed and sealed. Over $3 million loaned across 20 years. Not a single one marked as gifts. All were loans, with deadlines. Some included emails from my father. "Dad, I need another $200K to reassure a supplier. Just temporary. I'll pay back in 6 months." My grandfather's note: disbursed, reminder, 6-month term. And next to it, a red mark, unpaid. Then interim audit, Brian. Spreadsheets lined with endless columns. I wasn't fluent in accounting, but my grandfather's notes made it plain. Duplicate consulting fees, $800,000. Shell contractor, linked to Brian's contacts. Repayment demanded, completed. One scan showed minutes of a private meeting. You used company funds for an unapproved project. Repay, and this ends here. At the bottom, Brian's shaky signature. My eyes stung. The brother who had lectured me on financial responsibility had once betrayed the very company he claimed to protect. The folder, Computer Access, Browsing History, Stephanie, held screenshots. How to contest a will mental capacity. Elderly competency legal challenge. Transfer art assets quickly gallery private sale. I leaned back, exhaling sharply. The portrait of my family, so polished, so perfect on the outside, was now a cracked mosaic of betrayal spanning decades. I closed my eyes and imagined my grandparents sitting side by side, updating their will. They knew it would be called unfair. They knew rage would follow, and they still did it. Not because they loved me more, but because they saw the goodness I clung to in order to survive. I gripped the USB, tears streaming freely. The doorbell rang softly. I jumped. Through the frosted glass, I saw an older man, silver-haired, in a soil-stained jumpsuit, holding a wide-brimmed hat. I opened the door. He smiled warmly. "Hello, Miss Elaine. I'm Frank, the gardener. I worked for your grandparents for over 30 years. His voice was deep, steady, carrying the quiet warmth of a man who spoke little but did much. I invited him in and brewed tea. Frank sat gingerly at the edge of the couch, as if afraid to soil the pristine room. His eyes softened when they found the wedding photo. Mrs. Martha loved old-fashioned roses. Mr. Harold always indulged her. This time of year, they need pruning early, or the autumn bloom will wither. We sat in silence for a while. Frank rested his hat on his knees, speaking slowly. "You know, the year my daughter was preparing for college, my wife fell ill. We had nothing left. I kept it secret, too ashamed to tell anyone. Then one day, Mrs. Martha came into the garden and asked why my hands were shaking. I told her the truth. She didn't say much. That evening, Mr. Harold handed me an envelope. 'Frank, let your daughter study. Let your wife focus on healing. We're family.'" He coughed softly, his eyes reddening. "For the 3 months my wife was in the hospital, Mrs. Martha brought flowers and soup every day. What I owe them is not money. I owe them humanity." My throat tightened as I listened. I had known of some of the kindness my grandparents gave, but the truth was far greater than I imagined. Frank stood up hesitantly. "May I continue tending the garden? Mrs. Martha wouldn't rest easy if the roses were left untended." I nodded, smiling genuinely for the first time in days. "I really need you, Frank." News of Frank's return spread faster than I expected. A few days later, strangers, yet familiar in spirit, walked through the gates. An elderly woman from the church, the owner of the small bookshop at the end of the street, the young woman who ran the cafe where my grandparents always sat by the window. Each brought with them a story, a fragment of memory. The old woman said, "When I lost my husband, Mrs. Martha quietly slipped an envelope under my doormat. No name." The bookseller placed a leather-bound notebook on the table. "Mr. Harold prepaid for children's books for a granddaughter who will become an artist. I've kept them, waiting for you to come." The cafe owner smiled. She told me, "Save this corner seat for Elaine. The light is perfect for painting." Each piece of memory fit together into a legacy far different from wealth. Trust, generosity, the way they loved through action. I received each story like receiving back the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. In this house, grief and tenderness coexisted. I had lost my pillars, but I was being held up by a community, those my grandparents had touched. That night, I opened the box labeled Personal Journals. The brown leather covers were soft, their corners worn with time. My grandmother wrote faithfully almost every week. In one entry, she wrote about me. Ella is called a dreamer. Good. Dreamers see a path where others see only walls. In another, she wrote about my father. Thomas is not cruel. He is afraid, afraid to lose, afraid to fail, and fear makes a man cling, even to his own child. I read, torn between pain and understanding. Greed does not sprout from nowhere. It is nurtured by fear, by the habit of placing a price on everything, even family. In my grandfather's journals, the notes were drier but strangely warm. Lists of paintings my grandmother wanted to sell to fund scholarships, plans to teach me how to manage assets like an artist, which meant valuing meaning above profit. He wrote, "Money is a tool. If one day Ela forgets this, remind her. Tools do not control people. People control tools." I traced the ink with my finger, as if reaching for his hand. In the following days, I reorganized my grandmother's sunroom, now my studio. I cleaned the windows, arranged the brushes, laid out the palettes. Morning light slanted in, dust dancing like fine snow. I placed a blank sheet of paper down. My hand trembled. Then I painted the curve of the porch roof, the blush of the rose trellis, the dark corner where the rocking chair waited. Each brushstroke was a thank you whispered into the walls, the wood, the air. I knew I would turn this room into a place where children from the neighborhood could come and paint for free, so they too could be seen as I once was. One afternoon, Frank tapped on the window, holding up a ring of old keys. "You should know about this." He led me to the shed at the back of the garden. The oak door opened with an old-fashioned lock. Inside, among tools, stood a black steel cabinet with a small safe. Inside the safe was an envelope with property maps, notes about suburban land, contracts with a prestigious gallery, and a long list titled, "People to help if possible." A single mother, a scholarship music student, two sisters who sold newspapers outside the library. Beside it, in my grandmother's handwriting, "If you ever hesitate, start here." I laughed through tears. She had always prepared, even for my doubts. I called George, telling him what I had found. He listened silently, then said, "Elaine, all these things, journals, contracts, evidence, they're not for you to grow bitter. They are so you can stand calmly when you defend their will. People will call you selfish. Your job is to stand firm without malice. The law will handle the rest." I whispered, "Yes," feeling something click into place inside me. He was right. I didn't need to fight with shouting. I had the truth. I had people willing to stand by me. That night, I sat on the porch, the swing creaking beneath me. In my lap was a small notebook of my own. I wrote the first lines of a new beginning. Turn this house into an open space for the community. Create a small fund named Harold and Martha to support art scholarships. Start a weekend art class for underprivileged children. Preserve a garden corner, Martha's Rose, where anyone can take photos, free of charge. I smiled. The plan felt so small compared to $12 million, but I knew I was measuring with the right scale, the one my grandparents taught me. Then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Have you read everything yet? Be careful with what you keep. Someone will come to help you clean the house." I froze, staring at the screen. The piece I had just begun to build trembled. I lifted my eyes to the dark yard. The wind rustled the roses, the leaves whispering like footsteps. I told myself it was just a scare tactic. Still, I got up and checked every lock on the windows, bolting them twice. The next morning, Frank arrived early, carrying a new rose bush. He dug quietly, then said almost casually, "Last night, a strange car drove past twice, very slowly. You should install motion lights." I nodded, jotting it down. Then I told him about the weekend art class. His smile deepened, the lines around his eyes etched with warmth. "Mrs. Martha would love that. Mr. Harold, too." By noon, the cafe owner brought a tray of pastries, saying, "On rainy days, they used to buy all the cakes so I wouldn't lose money. For your art class, I'll sponsor milk and snacks for the kids." I thanked her, holding back tears. For the first time in weeks, I felt I wasn't alone. As evening fell, I returned to the study to sort through the last of the files. Beside the stack of papers lay an unopened envelope labeled, "Ile, read when you feel too weak to stand alone." I opened it. Inside was just one short line in my grandfather's hand. "If they are many, remember this. Truth, even alone, is still truth." I pressed the paper to my chest. His words were like a beam of timber bracing the hollow inside me. I now had plans, evidence, and people ready to help. I thought of calling Michael, the young lawyer George had once mentioned, to discuss strengthening the case, just in case. The legal battle and the truth unveiled rumors spread quickly in the community that my family would not let things go. And indeed, only a week after the night I was disowned, my father hired Vincent Morgan, a ruthless attorney infamous for his cutthroat tactics. They called him the Will Crusher because he rarely lost inheritance disputes. One rainy morning, I received the court summons. The cold black letters accused me of exploiting my grandparents' diminished mental capacity to manipulate and seize their estate. My hands shook uncontrollably as I read. For a moment, I felt branded a criminal in my own skin. Desperate, I called George Bennett, my grandparents' longtime lawyer. His voice was firm, steady. "Elaine, you must prepare for a long fight, but you are not alone. Your grandparents foresaw this." The next day, George introduced me to someone. The office door opened, and in walked a tall man, hair silver but eyes sharp, carrying an air of authority. He extended his hand, his voice deep and warm. "Elaine, I am James Parker. Perhaps you've never heard, but I was your grandfather's closest friend from university. And your godfather." I froze. My parents had never once mentioned this. Parker saw the confusion in my eyes and gave a bittersweet smile. "Your father didn't want me involved, but Harold and Martha kept in touch. They asked me to help if this day ever came." For the first time in weeks, strength surged in my chest. Not only George, I had another father figure standing by my side. At our first strategy meeting, James laid a thick file on the table. He flipped open the pages, his tone calm but cutting. "Your father, Thomas, borrowed over $3 million from your grandparents, never repaid. These are the original contracts, signed and dated, enough to prove intent to defraud. My throat tightened. He turned another page. Your brother, Brian, once embezzled $800,000 from the family company. Harold forced him to return it but kept it quiet to preserve the family's reputation. Here is the signed memorandum. I shut my eyes, recalling Brian's sneering face when he had called me selfish, yet the true betrayal was his. James's gaze hardened. And your sister, Stephanie. She researched legal methods to declare your grandparents mentally unfit in order to contest their will. We have evidence from their home computer logs. My hands went cold. My own blood. My kin. They had all taken advantage of Harold and Martha, and now they were painting me as the traitor. The first court hearing arrived. My entire family sat together, Vincent Morgan looming behind them in a sleek black suit. He thundered, "Your Honor, we have reason to believe Elaine Williams manipulated her grandparents in their vulnerable state to steal their estate." He presented doctored photos, statements from neighbors who barely knew us, each insinuating that Harold and Martha had been too old to be of sound mind. I sat frozen. Then James Parker rose. His voice cut through the room. The honor of Harold and Martha Williams cannot be tarnished by greed. Here are medical reports from 3 independent doctors, confirming their full mental clarity when signing the will. And here, he dropped the thick file on the bench, is proof of the plaintiff's own borrowing, embezzlement, and conspiracy to seize what was never theirs. The courtroom erupted. My father's face turned crimson. "That's private business. Irrelevant." James's stare was steel. Relevant because it shows why Harold and Martha entrusted Elaine. They were not blind. They sought to protect their legacy from this very greed. The trial dragged on for weeks. Every day, my family spat lies, smearing me as a fraud, a manipulator. Each night, I collapsed into my chair at home, convinced I could endure no more. But Parker's words rang in me. The truth standing alone is still the truth. Piece by piece, the evidence mounted. Loan contracts, audit records, Stephanie's search history, even secret recordings my grandfather had made of my father, urging him to sell the house. In court, that recording played, my father's voice, cold and calculating. "They're old. We need to act before they change their minds and leave it all to Elaine." The sound broke me, yet it also freed me. I had nothing left to lose but the truth. One session, my father glared at me, venom in his voice. "You're destroying this family, Elaine. You are no daughter of mine." My heart twisted, but my reply was steady. "No, Father. You abandoned me long ago. I am only protecting the ones who truly loved me." Silence fell across the courtroom. In that moment, the last thread tying me to them snapped. During a recess, I staggered into the hallway, my legs weak. A gentle hand touched my shoulder. I turned. It was Sarah, my cousin, the one who had once slipped me her number at that family ambush. Tears glimmered in her eyes. "You're not alone. I've heard too much. If needed, I'll testify." I nodded, overwhelmed. In the sea of betrayal, a single flame still burned. Finally, the verdict came on an autumn morning. My palms dug into the chair as the judge read aloud. My father and Brian convicted of financial fraud and falsification of loan records. Stephanie escaped criminal charges, but her case was forwarded to the state bar for ethical violations. All their schemes lay bare for the public to see. As I walked out, whispers swirled. The once prestigious family ruined. The youngest daughter was the only one worthy. Who would have thought? I kept my head down, a storm of bitterness and relief colliding inside me. The bridge to my family had burned beyond repair. Yet in the ashes, I knew I had to rebuild, not just for myself, but for Harold and Martha, who had always believed in me. Elaine continues the legacy. I moved back into the old house where my grandparents once lived. Every room, every wall still carried their presence. In the living room hung the portrait my grandmother painted of my grandfather, his gentle eyes forever watching. The study shelves still carried the faint scent of aged paper. Most of all, the glass room, where my grandmother and I had spent countless hours with brushes and watercolor, remained a sacred space. One afternoon, as I sat in the wide courtyard, watching sunlight filter through the branches of the old oak tree, a thought struck me. This house could not merely be a refuge for a survivor. It had to become a place where new seeds were planted, just as my grandparents had once planted seeds of hope in me. I began by opening the house to children in town, offering free art lessons every weekend. At first, only a handful came, but soon the word spread. Before long, my home was filled with laughter, with the sound of brushes sweeping across paper, and the notes of an old piano rising from the corner room. One parent, holding back tears, told me, "Thank you, Elaine. Here, the children don't just learn to paint, they learn to believe in themselves." Those words made my heart tremble. I realized I was walking the very path my grandparents had dreamed for me, using art and kindness to heal. From that moment, I formally established the Harold and Martha Williams Foundation with the mission of supporting young artists from difficult circumstances. The foundation was modest at first, built from the inheritance my grandparents left behind, but I believed it would grow over time. With each dream, it helped take flight. One day, Sarah, my cousin who had bravely stood by me when others chose betrayal, knocked on my door. She held an old guitar, her eyes shining. "Elaine, I don't have anywhere else to go, but I want to try pursuing music. Could I stay here with you?" I held her hands, my throat tight. "This is your home, too. You chose truth when everyone else chose lies. Our grandparents would be so proud of you." From that day forward, Sarah lived with me. She joined the art gatherings, teaching children how to play guitar. In the evenings, we sat on the porch together. She sang while I painted. The house was no longer silent. It was alive again, filled with sound and color. At a small exhibition hosted by the foundation, I met Michael Reed, a young lawyer. He had once been mentored by my grandfather when just starting his career. Michael approached me and shook my hand firmly. "Elaine, I've heard so much about you. Harold always said he believed you had one of the strongest spirits he'd ever known." Tears stung my eyes at his words. We talked for hours. Michael didn't look at me with pity, but with genuine respect. He shared stories of working with my grandfather and how he had always advised him, "Put people before profit." Through those late-night conversations, a quiet bond grew. He often came by to help draft legal documents for the foundation and sometimes joined Sarah and me at local street concerts. Whenever doubt or exhaustion weighed me down, Michael would simply rest a hand on my shoulder, smiling. "Elaine, you don't have to carry this alone. There are people who truly want to walk this path with you." Yet the past didn't let go so easily. At times, I still dreamed of my father's angry glare, Brian's sneers, Stephanie's venomous words. Some nights I broke down in tears in the dark, convinced I would always be the abandoned child. Michael sat beside me, listening in silence. One night, he finally said, "Elaine, they chose betrayal, but you chose something else. You chose compassion. That is why your grandparents trusted you, and that is why I trust you too." His words were like a small flame, warming the coldest corners of my heart. I finally understood. The past would always leave scars, but it no longer had the power to define me. The true legacy, the lesson. My grandparents left me. 1 year after I officially became the rightful heir, my life had completely changed. The old house was no longer silent. It had transformed into a community art center, alive every weekend with laughter, music, and the strokes of paintbrushes. Children from town came to learn art and music. Adults came to share stories, to feel the healing power of creativity. On the first anniversary of my grandparents' passing, I decided to hold a memorial ceremony in the garden. A large white canopy stretched across the yard, soft golden lights glowed warmly, and portraits of my grandparents hung alongside the artworks of young students. I wanted everyone to step inside, not just to remember their loss, but to feel the light they had left behind. The crowd was larger than I imagined. Elderly neighbors who once received gifts from my grandparents during cold winters, children they had taught who were now teenagers, families who had once been helped in times of need, all were there. They brought flowers, memories, and gratitude. Standing among them, I was overwhelmed. The love and kindness my grandparents had planted had never faded. It had only blossomed in the hearts of many others. And then, among the crowd, I saw a face I never expected, my mother's. She wore a simple dark dress, her hair tied back, her face marked with deeper lines than before. Our eyes met, and I froze. The woman who had once been so cold and harsh toward me now had tears in her eyes. She walked closer and whispered, "Elaine, I don't know if you want to hear this, but I must say it. I regret it all. I let pride and ambition blind me. I was foolish. And in the end, I lost your grandparents, and I lost you." I stood in silence. Memories of her sharp words and cold refusals were still vivid. A part of me wanted to turn away, but as I saw her trembling, fragile, I remembered what my grandfather once told me. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's choosing not to let the wound control you. I took a breath, my voice breaking. "I can't forget, Mother, but I hope you can learn from these losses. Grandfather and grandmother never wanted our family to be destroyed. Please think about that." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She said no more, only held my hand tightly before leaving. In that moment, I understood. Some fractures can never be fully healed, but remorse can still be a beginning. The ceremony was filled with unexpected warmth. Frank, the gardener, shared stories of how my grandparents had quietly helped struggling families. A young child, once my grandmother's art student, presented a painting of the elderly couple holding hands beneath a sunset. It reminded me of what the lawyer had read from the will. "Elaine, the true inheritance we leave is not measured in numbers, but in the values you carry forward." I stood before everyone, my voice trembling yet resolute. To many, my grandparents' legacy was the house, the assets, the investments. But to me, their true legacy was never in numbers. It was faith, kindness, integrity, and above all, the freedom to live as myself. Without them, I might have always remained the overlooked daughter, afraid to dream, to paint, to believe. But they planted in me the seeds that now allow me to stand here, not just living for myself, but carrying their light forward to the next generation. The garden fell silent for a few seconds, then erupted in applause. Faces glowed, eyes shimmered. I knew at that moment my grandparents were smiling somewhere. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the glass room. Moonlight spilled through the window, casting its glow on my grandmother's old paintbrush I still kept. I whispered, as though speaking to them, "Grandpa, Grandma, I finally understand. Wealth may fade, fame may crumble, but character endures. I promise I'll never let your light die out. I'll keep planting hope, keep inspiring, so that children who were once like me, overlooked, forgotten, can also find themselves." I closed my eyes, and in the gentle breeze, I could almost hear my grandmother's tender voice. "Elaine, you've done it." That day closed the chapter of sorrow and pain, but opened a new path. I was no longer the overlooked youngest daughter. I was Elaine, the guardian of Harold and Martha Williams's legacy, and I want to share this message with anyone who has ever felt not good enough, ever been dismissed by family or society. Your true worth does not lie in others' judgment, but in how you choose to live. Don't let anyone extinguish your dreams or your dignity. Find the place where you are loved and trusted, and from there, rebuild your life. My grandparents left me one lesson: love and integrity are the greatest legacy of all. I will continue to live, to plant seeds, so that their light will never fade. If you've stayed with me until now, I believe Elaine's story has touched your heart. We've all been underestimated at some point, but what matters is never giving up on yourself. If you feel connected to this journey and want to hear more real stories filled with tears, strength, and resilience, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe with the bell on so you won't miss the next story. This journey only finds its true meaning with you by my side.